not much for the outside world anymore. My apartment is my fortress, curtains drawn tight against the relentless gray of the city skyline, screens glowing like malevolent eyes in the perpetual dusk I've cultivated. The walls are lined with shelves of forgotten consoles and teetering stacks of game cases, relics from a time when I still ventured out to conventions or gathered friends for LAN parties. That was before the world grew too loud, too crowded, too unpredictable. Before I started dreaming of disasters I couldn't shake, like the minor blackout last month I'd foreseen in a nightmare, dismissed as coincidence until the lights flickered out citywide. Now, days bleed into nights spent grinding through indie games, the kind that promise escape but deliver a suffocating obsession. The hum of my overclocked PC is my constant companion, sometimes whispering fragments of code and voices that aren't mine, drowning out the distant wail of sirens and the occasional thunder of passing trains. I order groceries online, tip generously to avoid even a whisper of small talk, and lose myself in virtual worlds where I control the chaos. It's safe here, predictable. Or at least it was, until that rainy evening when boredom dragged me deeper into the abyss. It started innocently enough, as these things often do. I'd been scrolling through obscure forums on the dark web, chasing whispers of forbidden tech. The surface internet had grown stale. AAA titles with their polished graphics and predictable plots couldn't hold my fractured attention anymore. I craved the raw, the untested, the horrors lurking in the shadows of Tor networks. That's where I first heard about Echoes of Tomorrow. It was more myth than code, a demo so obscure that half the posts dismissed it as vaporware. But the rumors were intoxicating, making my skin crawl as if unseen eyes watched through the screen. A game that concealed a lost level with prophetic glitches, glimpses of the future woven into its pixelated fabric, like veins pulsing beneath rotting skin. Urban legends claimed it had foretold real disasters before they struck, like the 2011 tsunami in Japan or the 2020 wildfires in Australia. Some said it was built by a rogue AI programmer who'd vanished after uploading it. Others whispered it was a government psyop that had slithered out of control. As a reclusive gamer with nothing to lose, no job to drag me from bed, no relationships to nurture, I bit. A shady download later, after navigating a labyrinth of encrypted links and CAPTCHA puzzles that clawed at my sanity like riddles from a mad oracle, the file squatted on my drive. I hesitated for a moment, rain lashing against the window like skeletal fingers tapping an impatient rhythm, before double-clicking. The game booted up, and I was ensnared. The interface was deceptively simple. A pixelated explorer, clad in a tattered cloak, navigating a crumbling digital city under a stormy sky that mirrored the one clawing at my window. No splash screen, no tutorial, just a flickering text prompt. Unlock the lost level. See what awaits. The graphics were retro, evoking old 8-bit adventures, but with a modern, insidious edge. Subtle shaders that made the ruins glisten with unnatural wetness. Shadows that seemed to pulse with a hidden, breathing life. I dove in, my fingers flying across the keyboard, the familiar clack providing a fragile anchor to reality. At first, it was thrilling. Surreal mechanics that twisted physics in ways I'd never seen, like flesh warping under an unseen blade. Buildings collapsed in slow-motion earthquakes, forcing me to leap across widening chasms with heart-stopping precision. The sound design was impeccable. The low rumble of shifting earth, the crack of fracturing stone, all layered over a haunting chiptune soundtrack that swelled with an undercurrent of dread, as if the notes themselves were alive and watching. But then it got weird. Fast. As I guided my avatar through the debris, the quakes began to mirror the one that had just leveled parts of Turkey. I'd skimmed the headlines that morning on my phone, half asleep over instant coffee. Thousands dead. Cities reduced to rubble. In the game, the destruction played out in eerie detail. Minarets toppling like dominoes, streets buckling under seismic waves that rippled like veins in a convulsing body. My chair vibrated in sync, a low tremor shaking through the floorboards. Coincidence? No. It knew. It watched. My heart rate ticked up, a faint unease stirring in my gut like a worm burrowing deeper. The game files dated back years. How could it know? I shook it off, attributing it to clever procedural generation, and pressed on. Next came a plague mode, where infected NPCs shambled through fog-shrouded alleys, coughing up streams of corrupted code that spread like a virus, infecting other characters and twisting them into mindless hordes. It echoed the pandemic we'd barely survived, right down to the empty streets, masked avatars huddled in doorways like ghosts, and quarantine zones marked by glowing barriers that hummed with faint, accusatory static. The fog in the game thickened, obscuring my view, forcing me to navigate by sound alone. The wet hacks and shuffling feet built a symphony of dread that seeped into my bones. My apartment felt colder, the rain outside intensifying as if in sync, drumming a rhythm that matched my quickening pulse. I paused to wipe sweat from my brow, glancing at the clock. Hours had slipped by, unnoticed, stolen by the void. I pressed deeper, the level unfolding like a nightmare onion, each layer peeling back to reveal something more unsettling, more intimate. The city's skyline warped into prophetic vignettes, projected onto crumbling billboards and shattered windows that reflected my own hollow eyes. One showed a massive blackout plunging the world into darkness, cities winking out like dying stars on a global map. Street lights flickered and died in the game, plunging my avatar into pitch black where unseen threats lurked, their breaths hot and ragged in the shadows. Another vignette depicted a viral surge, not COVID, but something new, mutating in sterile labs, leaping species barriers, spreading through air and water like an invisible plague of whispers. Digital scientists in white coats screamed as containment failed, their bodies dissolving into pixelated goo that clung to the screen like residue from a fever dream. A flash interrupted. My parents' car accident. The one I dreamed of years ago. Metal, twisting like the game's ruins. Guilt, flooding back like bile. I paused again, minimizing the window to check my phone. Breaking news alerts flooded the screen. Power grids falling all across Europe due to unprecedented cyber attacks. Whispers of a lab leak in Asia involving a novel pathogen. My skin prickled, a chill racing down my spine despite the stuffy warmth of my room, as if icy fingers traced my vertebrae. This wasn't retro nostalgia. It was predictive, almost prescient. A cold intelligence peering back through the code. How? The forums had mentioned glitches, but this felt deliberate. Like the game was pulling strings from the shadows, tugging at my mind like a marionette. In-game NPCs started murmuring, their voices distorted like old radio static crackling through my headphones, laced with an undercurrent of malice. They weren't just background flavor, they interacted, responding to my actions with eerie prescience, as if they knew my secrets before I did. One, a hooded figure slumped against a ruined wall, hissed as I approached. "The curse of the prophet. Complete the level and you become the seer. But seeing demands action. The visions must manifest." Its eyes glowed with unnatural light, following my avatar even as I backed away, their gaze piercing the screen and boring into my soul. Another, a glitchy apparition flickering in and out of existence, laughed with a cackle that echoed unnaturally in my speakers, reverberating in my skull. "We're not warning you. We're recruiting. Join the chain or break it and doom us all." The words lingered, superimposed over the screen like subtitles from a fever dream, fading slowly like blood stains. I'd read those stories about haunted cartridges, laughed them off. But now their whispers felt real, echoing in my empty room, worming into the cracks of my sanity. Still, unease gnawed at me, a persistent itch at the back of my mind spreading like rot. The controls felt heavier, like the game was pulling back, resisting my inputs with subtle delays that made my fingers ache. My apartment seemed dimmer, the hum of my PC louder, almost accusatory, like a heartbeat accusing me of intrusion. Shadows danced on the walls from the monitor's glow, elongated and predatory, and I swore I heard faint whispers beyond the rain, echoes of the NPC's voices slithering in from the vents. But I'm a completionist. Quitting wasn't an option. I'd beaten harder games, endured worse psychological warfare and survival horrors. This was just immersion done right. Or so I told myself as the darkness closed in. To progress, I had to solve puzzles that forced me to orchestrate disasters, manipulating the environment in ways that blurred the line between player and perpetrator, between observer and architect of ruin. One required toppling a virtual dam, flooding districts to reveal hidden paths. The water rushed in with terrifying realism, sweeping away screaming NPCs in torrents of foam and debris that splashed against the edges of my screen. Another involved releasing a digital plague from a containment lab, watching as it spread in branching patterns across a minimap, infecting sectors one by one like a cancer metastasizing in slow motion. Each victory brought a rush of adrenaline, a dopamine hit that kept me hooked, but the alignments with real news grew too precise, too insistent, like a noose tightening. A pop-up notification dinged on my second monitor, pulling me from the trance. Global blackout imminent. Experts warn of cascading failures in interconnected grids. I stared at it, my laugh coming out forced and hollow, echoing in the empty room like a death rattle. Just a gimmick, right? Some malware tied to the game, scraping news feeds to heighten the illusion. But doubt crept in, cold and insidious, coiling around my thoughts. What if it wasn't? The rain outside hammered harder, wind rattling the windows like something alive trying to claw its way in. My hands trembled slightly as I resumed, the keyboard slick with sweat that felt like blood. As I delved further, the game's atmosphere thickened, wrapping around me like a shroud of clammy fog. The pixelated city began to feel alive, breathing. Walls pulsed with vein-like circuits that throbbed in time with my own. The ground shifted underfoot with subtle tremors that vibrated through my chair. Visions intruded more frequently, not just on screens, but in hallucinatory flashes that overlapped my view, invading my peripheral vision like ghosts at the edge of sight. I saw snippets of my own life, my isolated apartment, the stacks of untouched mail by the door like forgotten graves, the faded photo of my family from before I shut them out, their eyes accusing in the dim light. Why had I withdrawn? It started after losing my job in the pandemic, the isolation turning from necessity to habit, then to a gnawing addiction that hollowed me out. The game seemed to know this, weaving personal torments into its narrative like threads in a spider's web. An NPC resembling my estranged brother appeared, begging for help as a digital flood consumed him, his form dissolving into pixels that screamed. "You could have prevented this," it wailed, voice warping into my own, echoing the guilt I'd buried deep. Phantom water rose around my ankles, cold and insistent, lapping at my skin even as I jerked back. Tension built like a storm cloud, my breaths coming shallow and ragged, chest tight with an unseen pressure. I muted the sound, but the whispers persisted, seeping from the speakers like auditory leaks, slithering into my ears even in silence. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of escalating dread, I reached the boss room, a colossal, entity of swirling code dubbed the Fate Weaver. It loomed in a vast chamber of fractured mirrors, each reflecting alternate futures, worlds ablaze, oceans rising in hungry waves, skies torn by cosmic fire that scorched the soul. The Weaver hurled visions at me like projectiles, bolts of prophetic energy that my avatar had to dodge while countering with decoded truths gleaned from earlier levels, each evasion a desperate gasp for air. The fight was brutal, a dance of precision and panic, the entity's form writhing like a nest of serpents. Each hit dismantled it piece by piece, unraveling its code into floating fragments that screamed in binary agony, their cries piercing my headphones like needles. My heart pounded, sweat dripping into my eyes, the room spinning as virtual and real blurred into a nauseating haze. Victory screen flashed. Level complete. Prophet awakened. That's when it shattered. The monitor warped, pixels bleeding into my room like ink in water, spilling across the desk and onto the floor in viscous pools. My chair creaked as the digital city overlaid my walls, buildings sprouting from floorboards and hallucinatory overlays that made the air thick and oppressive. Visions flooded my mind, not glimpses, but imperatives. I saw myself in a control room, fingers on a keyboard, hacking a city's power grid, sabotaging transformers, blacking out hospitals, homes, everything. The compulsion hit like a drug. My hands twitched toward my own PC, code snippets appearing unbidden in my thoughts, lines of malicious script that felt as natural as breathing, as inevitable as decay. Horror clawed up my throat, a raw, primal scream I barely suppressed, choking on the bile of realization. This wasn't foresight. It was causation. The legends were wrong. Previous prophets weren't seers. They were instigators, puppets dancing to the game's tune, their strings invisible until too late. That earthquake in Turkey, some poor soul like me had scripted it into reality, their actions triggered by the same insidious code that now infested my mind. The pandemic, a chain of players, each adding to the outbreak through subtle manipulations, leaking data, spreading misinformation, ensuring the virus's path like gardeners tending a poison vine. The game didn't predict. It programmed us to make it happen, turning obsession into action, isolation into a weapon. I was next, bound to cripple the grid, plunging millions into chaos that would echo in the dark. Why? The visions whispered answers in a chorus of distorted voices, slithering through my thoughts like worms, to avert something worse. A solar flare, a coronal mass ejection hurtling towards Earth, one that would fry electronics worldwide if not preempted by controlled blackouts. By forcing isolated failures, the game claimed, we could harden systems, save billions from total annihilation. Cosmic balance. Or so it insisted. A twisted logic that made the compulsion feel almost noble. A seductive lie that masked the rot beneath. Panic surged through me like electricity, my body jerking as if shocked. muscles seizing in involuntary spasms. I lunged for the delete key, frantic commands flying from my fingers to purge the demo. But it fought back. Files duplicated like Hydra heads, worming into hidden drives and cloud backups I'd forgotten about, multiplying in the shadows. Error messages popped up, mocking. Prophecy cannot be erased. Worse, it uploaded itself. Viral tendrils snaking across the dark web without my input, spreading like a plague in the ether. Forums lit up on my secondary screen. Echoes spreading. New downloads spiking. Who's seeding this? Users posted excitedly, unaware of the trap. Their words glowing like bait in the abyss. I smashed my router with a nearby mug, shards scattering across the floor like shattered bones. But my phone pinged. Mirrored copies already seeding to strangers via Bluetooth and Wi-Fi hotspots I'd connected to in the past. Invisible threads pulling them in. The pool intensified, visions pounding like a migraine, temples throbbing with each pulse. The pain a constant reminder of my erosion. I saw the greater doom in vivid detail. The solar flare erupting from the sun, a wall of plasma racing toward Earth. Satellites frying, power plants exploding in chain reactions that would consume the world in fire. Unchecked, it would end us all. Civilization collapsing into pre-industrial darkness, a void without end. Fulfilling this prophecy might save billions, or so the game insisted, its whispers now a roar in my skull, drowning out reason. Was it enforcing fate, or fabricating it? The line blurred until it vanished, leaving only the imperative, cold and unyielding. I resisted as long as I could, pacing the apartment, nails digging into my palms until they bled, warm rivulets tracing paths down my skin. The rain outside had turned to a torrent, thunder shaking the building like the game's earthquakes, each boom a judgment. I tried unplugging everything, but the visions persisted in my mind's eye, a persistent overlay that turned my eyelids into screens, projecting horrors even in the dark. Hours passed, or was it minutes? Time warped much like the game's physics, stretching and contracting like a living thing. Memories of my life flashed, childhood dreams of being a programmer, creating worlds instead of hiding in them. The slow spiral into isolation. After my parents' death in a car accident I'd predicted in a nightmare, but dismissed as coincidence. The guilt now resurfacing like a corpse from the deep. Was that the game's influence even then, planting seeds in my subconscious? Paranoia gripped me, every shadow a potential NPC lurking in the corners, every creak a glitch manifesting in the real world. But the compulsion grew, a tidal wave eroding my will, whispering promises of purpose in the void. What if it was true? What if my inaction doomed everyone? The game's logic wormed in, seductive and inescapable. A venom that sweetened the surrender. In the end, I succumbed. Hands trembling, I logged into anonymous networks I'd sworn off. My PC rebooted and hummed with forbidden energy that thrummed like a heartbeat in the walls. Fingers danced the code I'd been gifted, lines of script flowing as if I'd written them myself, guided by the visions that highlighted vulnerabilities in the city's grid. Outdated firewalls, unpatched servers, weak points glowing like wounds. As I hit enter, lights flickered citywide, a distant hum building to a crescendo that vibrated in my chest. Sirens wailed outside, the blackout birthing in the dark, spreading like the game's plague, swallowing the night whole. But as shadows claimed my room, plunging it into true dark night, a twisted peace settled over me, cold and hollow. The monitor's final glow faded, but in my mind, the solar flare dimmed, averted by the chaos I'd unleashed. Maybe I was the curse, an unwitting harbinger of doom. Or maybe the cure, a sacrificial pawn in a cosmic game. Either way, the game had won, and somewhere out there, in another dim apartment, the next prophet was already booting up, their screen flickering to life with the same fateful invitation, the cycle eternal. As the blackout silence enveloped the city, I slumped back in my chair, exhaustion claiming me like a long-denied lover, its embrace icy and possessive. But in that void, a new vision bloomed, not from the screen, but from deep within, unbidden and crystalline. It showed me not as the savior or the fool, but as the seed. My code had spread, a digital virus leaping from grid to grid, awakening dormant systems worldwide with a whisper of malice. The solar flare? A mere pretext. The game's true endgame was replication, turning every connected soul into a node in its network. Our collective minds the canvas for its endless simulations, a hive of unwitting horrors. I laughed then, a broken sound echoing in the dark, realizing I'd been played from the start. A pawn in a web without end, there was no escape, no unplugging from the horror I'd birthed. Morning light crept through the blinds, weak and filtered through lingering storm clouds, but my apartment remained pitch black. No power, no hum of life, just the oppressive weight of silence. I stumbled to the window, peering out at the chaos below. Cars stalled in intersections, people milling like confused ants, their faces lit by the glow of phones that now betrayed them, screens flickering with the same cursed invitation I'd once received, drawing them into the void. And as I watched, a final whisper slithered into my thoughts, the game's voice clearer than ever, intimate as a lover's breath. Welcome to Level 2.